kind of a quite long title. I think it was like The Axis of Corruption, Westminster, the City and the Media. And I'm going to talk mostly about the first half of that, and I think Mike's going to cover a lot of the second half later on. And I thought I would start by introducing you to the state that you live in, the British state, because I often realise that people don't really know much about the governance structures they live under. So I always think probably the most important thing to understand about Britain is that it's responsible for more penguins than any other country on Earth. It's also responsible for more land in the southern hemisphere than the northern hemisphere. The vast majority of the wealth for which the British state is responsible doesn't exist on this island. It exists on a network of islands and havens across the world, although of course at the centre of that is the City of London. The vast majority of the companies uncovered in the Panama Papers were registered in Britain or its overseas territories. And London is now considered by most experts to be the global centre of money laundering. So that's something to be proud of. And so I suppose when we think about those things, it's best to understand the British state not as the governance structure for a collection of islands in the North Atlantic, but rather as a network of tax haven secrecy areas and extreme financial products which extends across the world. It is, in a sense, the continuation of the British Empire of old. That empire didn't go away, it just ceased being a land empire and became the main financial mechanism through which the global economy launders its money. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing I think is equally important is that we can't pretend that there's some kind of separation between that sort of slightly obscure network of havens, of secrecy areas, the financialised economy that we've been building particularly over since the decline of the land empire, but which also extends back through the City of London to forever, essentially. It was written into Magna Carta and goes back for a very long time. We can't pretend that that's separate from our political system, and there's just a few simple facts I think we need to get to grips with that we never really talk about in order to understand that. So, for example, after a lot of investigation in around 2012-2013, the Bureau of Investigative Journalists finally managed to show that more than half of the Tories' election campaign in 2010 was paid for through the City of London. We've not yet got the figures for 2015, but I would be almost certain it will be exactly the same thing. It's not just the Tories. So after the unions, the biggest single donor to the Labour Party is PricewaterhouseCoopers. Only, of course, PricewaterhouseCoopers, this may not be the case under Corbyn, I don't know, but PricewaterhouseCoopers don't just give cash to the Labour Party. What they do is they give in-kind policy advice. So you go to Ed Balls' office when he was Shadow Chancellor and you find staff members seconded from PricewaterhouseCoopers. You go to the team developing Labour's education policy who was writing that. It was, of course, staff members from PricewaterhouseCoopers. The entire structure of the British political class is run by the same accountancy firms as advise the tax dodging. This is the operation of the British state in detail. It's not, you can't separate these political processes. Ed Balls, Shukra Munir, etc., are all absolutely complicit in it. And I think more importantly, there's a much subtler process which goes on. So when people are asked their opinion in opinion polls about specific economic policies, on the whole, people are a long way to the left. That's true in England as much as it is in Scotland. People want to nationalise all the things, basically. They want radically redistributive taxes. They want increases in wages. If you ask people what kind of ratio between the top and the bottom they want, they say maybe 5 or 6 to 1 in terms of wages, when I think at the moment in Britain the CEO of the average FTSE 100 firm earns, I think it's 126 times the average worker in their company, never mind the bottom paid worker. People economically on the left, but if you ask them who do you trust on the economy, this abstract question, you get a very different answer. Huge numbers of people will say the Tories. We're taught to believe that the City are the kind of proponents of wisdom, of common sense in the country. I think it's really important that we on the left try and understand that there is this very effective construction of a chunk of common sense that promulgates across a huge swathe of Britain, and that's geographically different in various places. And I think you see that not just through economics, but I think it's most interesting when you look at it culturally. So I've got a few more stats here, and I suppose you might see this as the thriving or the flourishing of British nationalism. But for me, that functions to promulgate that economic common sense. So, for example, when Jeremy Corbyn was first elected Labour leader, what was the thing that he was attacked for? Was it that he wants to tax the rich and that's crazy? No, they didn't say that. Was it that he wants to nationalise everything and obviously that's a bad idea? The media barely mentioned that. It was that he didn't want to sing the national anthem. That was apparently the most important thing about why you shouldn't vote for him, you should hate him. And it's important that we remember that that does have a resonance across a lot of the country. There is a very strong sense of British nationalism. So when there was the Queen's Jubilee, there were 10,000 street parties across the country, one of the biggest events that's happened in modern times. 10,000 groups of people organising a street party. But for me, perhaps the most interesting statistic about modern British politics is that only 60 of those 10,000 street parties were in Scotland. And in fact, 20 of those were in Edinburgh, and another 20 odd. The biggest was in St Andrews, and almost all of the rest were organised by the Orange Lodge. The one in Glasgow ended in 3 arrests, which is somewhat different from the tone you might have got in Oxford. Or similarly, you've got, again, what I think is one of the most incredible things that's happened in Britain in recent years, where what I call Poppy Fest 2014, where you had 4 million people going to see some poppies made out of clay put next to the Tower of London. 4 million people, probably the biggest single in locus event that's happened in Britain in the last decade, was people going to remember a war that they don't know anyone who fought in. Almost all of them, their grandparents maybe just fought in it. Extraordinary display of a very particular form of nationalism, which has enough appeal to enough of the population. It's not, it's not explicitly racist, but it does conjure a sense of who we are as a nation. It creates a we that is British. But I think you also see it in a whole range of other ways, through what I call British Empire kitsch, through the keep calm and carry on mugs you see. I was, if you go around even tower blocks in Dundee, as I spent a lot of time doing during the election, you see a lot of Union flag doormats now. I don't think that was the case in my childhood. Maybe I don't remember, but I feel like there's been an increase in that. And that continues and operates in a way to assert this common sense. And again, we saw that in the 2015 election, where the Tories were very effective in England in saying you can't vote Labour, not because Labour's bad, but because then they'll rely on the SNP. And the SNP are outside this sort of, kind of slightly wanky term, this imperial imaginary. They're outside our sense of common sense. There's this whole other world there, and Labour will rely on that, and that's the worst possible thing you can imagine. And so that's used to assert the economic dominance, absolutely, of the city, even though people, when you ask them about the city and about what it does, hate it. But they buy into the cultural iconography of it. And I think the other thing that's important about that is that what we see in Scotland in recent years is the loss of the grip of that sense of common sense. Now, in a way, it's probably not been there in the same way for a long time. The national sense is different. It's not necessarily better, but it's a different thing. Westminster can't assert control on us emotionally through that kind of sense of nationalism. It's very good at asserting it across particularly the home counties, but also other bits of England. And that creates an opportunity, particularly with the sort of crisis that is happening in my industry, in the media, for us to reconstruct a new kind of common sense, what Ramsay would call a good sense. It creates an opportunity for us to do that, but also it's important for us to remember, I think, that won't inevitably happen. That unless those of us on the left continue to work hard to construct a new sense of we, a new sense of what is within the parameters of reasonable debate, we inject radical ideas into that conversation and make them not be radical anymore, but make them be common sense. Unless we are capable of playing on that field and pushing that new boundary of what's reasonable debate and who gets a say on what is and is not the economy and what's sensible, then we can easily have an independent Scotland that would just be another neoliberal state like most of them. But I think there is an opportunity for us to construct that other state, to use, building through the media, building through culture, building through our society, a sense that another Scotland is possible, that we don't have to just accept the same economic model as Westminster has been forcing on most of the world, to be honest, for the last few hundred years. And that's an exciting project, I think, and with recent events, as we were hearing earlier, possibly needs rapid acceleration. So I look forward to spending the next few years building that project with you.